Hello, fellow history lovers and English learners. Welcome back to our cozy archives. Imagine a world where every single book is written by hand. One single mistake means starting over from the very beginning. For centuries, knowledge was a luxury that only the richest and most powerful could afford. People lived and died without ever seeing a written word or understanding the vast secrets of the world beyond their small villages. Did you know that a single invention, born from the simple mechanics of a wooden wine press, shattered the chains of silence and changed the path of the human race forever? This machine did not just print ink on paper. It printed ideas into the minds of millions. It destroyed the monopoly of the elite and gave birth to the modern age of information. Before the mid-15th century, the world was a very different place. If you wanted to read a Bible or a collection of poetry, you had to hire a scribe. These professional writers spent months, and sometimes even years, hunched over desks in cold monasteries. They used bird feathers as pens and animal skins as paper. Because the process was so slow, books were incredibly expensive. A single book could cost as much as a small house or a large farm. This meant that only kings, queens, and high-ranking church officials owned books. Most people were illiterate, meaning they could not read or write. They relied entirely on what their leaders told them. The history of humanity was a story whispered in the shadows, waiting for a light to turn on. In the city of Mainz, which is located in modern-day Germany, a man was working in secret. His name was Johannes Gutenberg. He was a goldsmith by trade, which gave him a unique set of skills. He was an expert at working with delicate metals and creating intricate patterns. Gutenberg was not just a craftsman. He was a dreamer with a very practical mind. He looked at the slow, painful process of copying books and saw a problem that needed a solution. He spent many years experimenting with different materials and techniques. He faced many failures and lost a lot of money, but he never gave up. He believed that knowledge should not be a secret kept by the few. He wanted to make it available to the many. Chapter 1. The Silhouette of a Genius. Johannes Gutenberg was born around the year 1395. Growing up in a wealthy family, he had access to an education that most children of his time could only imagine. However, his life was not always easy. His family was often involved in the political struggles of Mainz, and they were even forced to leave the city at one point. This instability might have fueled his desire to create something lasting. During his time away from home, he learned the art of stone cutting and metalworking. These technical skills would later become the foundation of his revolutionary invention. He was a man of the Renaissance before the Renaissance had fully reached his homeland. He possessed a restless spirit and a sharp intellect that was always looking for a better way to do things. The world Gutenberg inhabited was one governed by the rhythms of the seasons and the strict doctrines of the Catholic Church. Information moved only as fast as a horse could gallop. News from distant lands arrived as rumors, often distorted and changed by the time it reached the common people. Gutenberg realized that if he could find a way to reproduce the written word quickly, he could change everything. He began to work on a machine that would eventually be known as the printing press. He kept his work hidden because he feared that others would steal his ideas before they were finished. He lived a quiet life, focused entirely on his goal, often sacrificing his personal comfort for the sake of his project. Gutenberg's genius lay in his ability to combine existing technologies in a completely new way. People had been using wooden blocks to print images for centuries, especially in East Asia. However, this method was not practical for long books because each page required a brand new, hand-carved block of wood. If one letter broke, the whole block was ruined. Gutenberg knew he needed something more flexible. He looked at the screw presses used by farmers to crush grapes for wine. He realized that the same downward pressure could be used to press a flat surface onto a sheet of paper. This was the first major piece of his puzzle, but it was far from the last. Chapter 2. The Birth of Movable Type. The most critical part of Gutenberg's invention was the concept of movable type. Instead of carving an entire page out of one block of wood, he decided to create individual metal letters. Each letter of the alphabet would be its own tiny piece of metal. These pieces could be arranged in a frame to form words and sentences. Once a page was printed, the letters could be taken out of the frame and rearranged to print a completely different page. This was a revolutionary concept that required incredible precision. The letters had to be exactly the same height so that they would apply even pressure to the paper. If one letter was slightly taller than the others, it would tear the paper or create a messy blot of ink. To create these metal letters, Gutenberg used his skills as a goldsmith. He developed a special alloy, which is a mixture of metals consisting of lead, tin, and antimony. This mixture was perfect because it melted at a low temperature but became very hard when it cooled. It did not shrink or crack, which meant the letters remained sharp and clear through many thousands of uses. He also invented a hand mold that allowed him to cast these letters quickly and accurately. This meant he could produce thousands of identical A's and B's in a very short amount of time. This mass production of individual components was a massive leap forward in human engineering. However, having the letters was not enough. Gutenberg also had to reinvent ink. The ink used by scribes was water-based, which worked well on animal skins but would bead up and run on metal type. It also took a long time to dry, which would slow down the printing process. Gutenberg experimented with different recipes until he created a thick, oil-based ink made from soot and linseed oil. This ink stuck to the metal letters and transferred beautifully to the paper without smudging. It dried quickly and remained dark and legible for centuries. This small chemical breakthrough was just as important as the mechanical one, showing that Gutenberg was a scientist as much as a craftsman. Chapter 3. The Financial Gamble. Building a printing press was an incredibly expensive project. Gutenberg needed money for metal, paper, ink, and a workshop. He also had to pay assistants to help him with the heavy labor. Since he did not have enough money of his own, he had to look for an investor. He found a wealthy businessman named Johann Fust. In the year 1450, Fust lent Gutenberg a large sum of 800 guilders to finish his work. This was a massive amount of money at the time. A few years later, Fust invested another 800 guilders. However, this partnership was not a happy one. Fust was a businessman who wanted a quick return on his investment, while Gutenberg was a perfectionist who took his time. As the years passed, Gutenberg worked tirelessly on his most ambitious project, a beautiful, printed version of the Bible. He wanted to prove that his machine could produce something just as elegant and holy as the handwritten books of the monks. He spent a great deal of time designing a typeface that mimicked the handwriting of the era, known as blackletter or Gothic script. He wanted the transition from handwritten to printed books to be as smooth as possible for his future customers. He was not just making a machine. He was creating a new standard for beauty and clarity in communication. The pressure was enormous, and the stakes were higher than ever before. In the year 1455, just as the printing of the Bibles was nearing completion, disaster struck. Johann Fust grew impatient and sued Gutenberg for the return of his money, plus interest. Gutenberg could not pay him back because all his wealth was tied up in the unfinished Bibles and the printing equipment. The court ruled in favor of Fust. Gutenberg lost his workshop, his tools, and most of his completed Bibles. It was a heartbreaking moment for the inventor. Fust took over the business and partnered with Gutenberg's talented assistant, Peter Schoeffer. They began to sell the Bibles and took most of the credit for the invention. Gutenberg was left with very little, but his invention was now out in the world. Chapter 4. The Masterpiece of Mainz. The Gutenberg Bible, often called the 42-line Bible, remains one of the most famous books in history. Only about 180 copies were originally printed. Some were printed on expensive vellum, which is made from calfskin, while others were printed on a high-quality paper imported from Italy. Each page had 2 columns of text, and each column had 42 lines, which gave the book its nickname. Despite the lawsuit, these Bibles were a sensation. They were uniform, clean, and much easier to read than many handwritten manuscripts. They proved once and for all that the printing press was a viable and superior way to produce books. The impact of these Bibles was immediate and profound. Suddenly, Several copies of the exact same text existed in different cities. This had never happened before. In the past, every copy of a book was slightly different because of the human errors made by scribes. If one scribe fell asleep and missed a sentence, that mistake would be copied by the next person. With the printing press, errors could be corrected in the type before the printing began. This led to a new level of accuracy and standardization in literature, law, and religion. It was the beginning of a shared human record that was reliable and consistent across borders. Although Gutenberg had lost his primary workshop, he did not stop working. He eventually set up a smaller press and continued to print various documents. He never achieved the great wealth that Fust and Schoeffer did, but in his later years, he received some recognition. The Archbishop of Mainz granted him a title and a pension, providing him with corn, wine, and clothing for the rest of his life. He died in the year 1468, perhaps not fully realizing the magnitude of the fire he had started. The secret of the printing press was out, and it was spreading like a wildfire across the European continent. Chapter 5. The Wildfire of Knowledge. The fall of Mainz in 1462 during a local conflict actually helped the printing press spread even faster. Many of Gutenberg's trained apprentices fled the city and took their knowledge with them. They traveled to Italy, France, Spain, and England, setting up their own printing shops in major trading hubs. By the year 1500, less than 50 years after the first Bible was printed, there were printing presses in more than 250 cities across Europe. It is estimated that up to 20 million books had been printed by that time. This was more books than had been produced in the previous 1,000 years combined. Venice became one of the most important centers for printing in the world. A man named Aldus Manutius revolutionized the industry even further there. He realized that the giant, heavy folios of the past were difficult to carry and use. He invented the octavo size, which is similar to a modern paperback book. He also created the italic typeface to save space on the page. These smaller, cheaper books could be carried in a pocket. Suddenly, people were reading while they traveled or while they sat in parks. Reading was no longer a formal activity performed in a library. It was becoming a part of everyday life for the growing middle class. The surge in book production caused a dramatic drop in prices. Books that once cost a year's salary now cost only a week's wages. As books became affordable, the motivation to learn how to read skyrocketed. Parents wanted their children to be educated so they could participate in this new world of ideas. Schools and universities began to expand, using printed textbooks to teach students. This increase in literacy began to break down the social walls that had existed for centuries. Knowledge was no longer a secret kept behind locked doors. It was now available on the street corner, in the marketplace, and in the hands of the common man. Chapter 6. Shattering the Monolith. The printing press did more than just spread knowledge, it challenged power. For 1,000 years, the Catholic Church had been the primary source of information and authority in Europe. Most books were in Latin, a language that only the highly educated could understand. The Church controlled what was printed and what was taught. However, with the press, people began to print books in their own local languages, such as German, French, and English. This is called vernacular literature. When people read the Bible or political essays in their own language, they started to think for themselves and question the authorities who had governed them for so long. In the year 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther wrote a list of 95 arguments against the practices of the Catholic Church. This document is known as the 95 Theses. In the past, such a document might have been ignored or destroyed. But thanks to the printing press, Luther's ideas were copied and distributed throughout Germany in just 2 weeks. Within a month, they were being read all over Europe. This sparked the Protestant Reformation, a religious and political movement that permanently changed the map of the world. The printing press acted as a megaphone for Luther, allowing him to reach millions of people without ever leaving his home. The authorities were terrified by this new technology. They tried to control it by passing laws that required printers to have a license. They even created lists of banned books. known as the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. Some printers were arrested, and their shops were burned down. But it was too late. The machine was too simple to build and too profitable to stop. For every press that was shut down, two more appeared in a different city. The monopoly on truth had been broken. For the first time in history, an individual with a powerful idea and a printing press could challenge the greatest empires on earth. Chapter 7. The Dawn of Science and Reason. While religion and politics were being transformed, the world of science was also undergoing a revolution. Before the printing press, scientists worked in isolation. They rarely shared their data because it was too difficult to copy. Many spent their lives rediscovering things that had already been found by someone else in a different country. The press changed this by allowing scientists to publish their findings and share them with a global community. This led to a snowball effect, where one discovery quickly led to another. The scientific revolution was, in many ways, a product of the printing press. A famous example is Nicholas Copernicus. In the year 1543, he published a book that claimed the Earth rotated around the sun, rather than the other way around. Because his work was printed, it reached other great minds like Galileo Galilei and Johannes Kepler. They were able to look at his data, check it for errors, and build upon it. Later, Sir Isaac Newton used printed reports from all over the world to develop his laws of motion and gravity. The ability to verify information and build on the work of others is the heart of the modern scientific method. Without the press, we might still be living in an age of superstition and guesswork. The printing press also standardized diagrams and maps. In the age of scribes, a map was only as good as the person drawing it. Every time a map was copied, the locations of mountains and rivers shifted slightly. This made long-distance travel and exploration very dangerous. Printed maps, however, were identical. Explorers could use the same charts to navigate the vast oceans. This contributed to the Age of Discovery, leading to the mapping of the Americas and the expansion of global trade. The world was literally becoming smaller and more connected because of the precision of the printed page. Chapter 8. The Voice of the People. As we moved into the 17th and 18th centuries, the printing press gave birth to a new phenomenon, the newspaper. People no longer had to wait for months to hear about what was happening in the capital city. Weekly and then daily papers began to appear in London, Paris, and Philadelphia. These papers contained news about the government, advertisements for goods, and opinion pieces about the state of the world. This created something called public opinion. People were now debating the actions of their leaders in coffee houses and taverns. The seeds of modern democracy were being sown in the ink of the daily news. In the American colonies, Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense in 1776. It was written in simple, clear English so that anyone could understand it. Because it was printed in huge numbers, it reached nearly every colonist. It argued that it was time for the colonies to break away from British rule. Many historians believe that this single printed document did more to spark the American Revolution than any battle or speech. The press had become a weapon of the people. It allowed for the organization of large groups of citizens who were united by a common set of ideas and goals. The French Revolution also relied heavily on the power of the press. Thousands of pamphlets and newspapers were printed to spread the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. While these movements often led to violence and chaos, they also led to the creation of constitutions and the protection of human rights. The idea that every person has a voice and the right to information became a fundamental part of the modern world. We owe this sense of individual power to the metal letters of Gutenberg's workshop. He gave the world the tools to build a new society, based on the shared knowledge of all its members. Chapter 9. A Legacy That Never Fades. By the 19th century, the wooden hand press was replaced by massive steam-powered iron presses. These machines could print thousands of pages per hour. This led to the golden age of newspapers and the rise of the novel as a popular form of entertainment. Authors like Charles Dickens and Mark Twain became international superstars because their books were printed in huge quantities and sold at low prices. The printing press had completely transformed how humans spend their time, how they learn, and how they relate to one another. It was the ultimate engine of progress, driving the Industrial Revolution and the modern era. Today, we live in a digital age. We have the internet, smartphones, and social media. Some people think that the printing press is becoming obsolete or no longer useful. But if you look closely, the internet is really just the digital evolution of Gutenberg's dream. It is about the rapid, mass distribution of information. It is about breaking down barriers and giving everyone a voice. The challenges we face today, such as fake news and the struggle over who controls information, are the exact same challenges that people faced in the 16th century. The technology has changed, but the human story remains the same. The story of the printing press is a story of human courage and creativity. It shows us that a single person with a good idea can change the world, even if they face debt, lawsuits, and failure. Johannes Gutenberg died without knowing that he was one of the most influential people to ever live. He did not just invent a machine. He invited the whole world to join a conversation that is still going on today. Every time we pick up a book, read a news article, or scroll through a website, we are using the legacy of a goldsmith for minds who dared to think that knowledge should belong to everyone. How would our world look today if Gutenberg had never succeeded? Would we still be living under the rule of kings and queens who control everything we are allowed to know? Is the digital revolution of today helping us become more enlightened, or are we drowning in too much information? What do you think is the real truth behind this ancient legend of the man and his machine? Did he truly perish in obscurity, or did he find a new beginning in the minds of every person who has ever learned to read? What will be the printing press of our future, and are we ready for the changes it will bring?